30 on WTTW. WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center.
These are more than just shopping centers for the community. They're gathering places where they maintain their culture.
Black joy and the Black experience is magical.
PBS, where the drama is on Sunday nights on Masterpiece. Miss Scarlet and the Duke.
It's Miss Scarlet. She's disappeared.
Followed by All Creatures Great and Small.
Bed now.
Who's next? And the finale of The Long Song.
Your houses, they belong to me.
Miss Scarlet and the Duke. All Creatures Great and Small. And the finale of The Long Song on Masterpiece.
This is our story.
The Black church has sustained the African-American people from the days of slavery to this day.
I don't know how we could have survived as a people without it.
The role of music in the Black church is everything.
We had to have some individual and institutional armor in order to preserve our sanity.
We are a testament to the goodness and the grace of God.
Tuesday at 9 on WTTW.
Hi, Chicago. I'm April, and you're watching WTTW.
Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment, but first, some of today's top stories. 10% of all Illinoisans have now received at least the first dose of the coronavirus vaccine. That's according to state health officials who also report more than 95,000 vaccinations in the last 24 hours. That's a record. This comes as CPS announces it will open 4 school-based COVID-19 vaccination sites next week so it can begin distributing 1,500 first-dose vaccinations to teachers. And today, Governor Pritzker says the state will be ready to meet the vaccination demand by February 26th, when anyone with a pre-existing medical condition will be eligible.
Johnson & Johnson's vaccine is going to come before the FDA, and there's a great deal of optimism that they'll get their emergency use authorization, and therefore we'll be able to begin to get those vaccines added on top of Pfizer and Moderna.
And state public health officials report nearly 2,600 new coronavirus cases today, including 32 additional deaths. That makes for a statewide total of more than 1.15 million cases and 19,873 deaths. Once again, be prepared for some dangerously low wind chills this weekend. The city's announced a pair of warming centers will be open during the weekend from 9 to 5 as wind chill values are expected to read well below zero tomorrow. And you can visit our website for more information on those warming centers. And joining us now are our very own Heather Sharon of WTTW News, Rachel Hinton of the Chicago Sun-Times, Ben Bradley of WGN-TV, and Greg Pratt of the Chicago Tribune. First tonight, former President Trump's impeachment trial. Trump's lawyers rested after their 3-hour defense today. Here's what both sides argued this week, and then some of the powerful riot video that was used by House managers.
You don't have to take my word for it that the insurrectionists acted at Donald Trump's direction. They said so.
We're fighting for Trump. Exercise your common sense about what just took place. When you or I make a mistake and something very bad happens, we would show remorse. We would accept responsibility. President Trump didn't do any of that.
The only logical conclusion is that the purpose of this gathering is to embarrass the 45th President of the United States and in some way try to create an opportunity for senators to suggest that he should not be permitted to hold office in the future.
This constitutional cancel culture.
Ben Bradley, as far as we know, there are nowhere near enough GOP senators on board for a conviction. Do you anticipate any last-minute surprises and changes of heart?
You know, you may get one or two changes of heart. I mean, we saw one surprise with a Republican senator from Louisiana coming over to say and vote that he thought it was, in fact, constitutional as an issue to proceed with this. But I don't think you're changing a lot of hearts and minds in the chamber. I think it'll be interesting to see what Mitch McConnell does. He is not telegraphing that at this point. But, you know, it struck me as I anchored the coverage today for WGN that, you know, the attorneys for former President Trump wanted to focus as if everything only happened on January 6th, one speech in front of one crowd, and that he used the words peacefully and patriotically demonstrate, as opposed to looking at the fact that for months he had told these supporters that the election had been stolen, that they needed to stop the steal, that they in fact needed to show up in Washington on January 6th to take matters into their own hands. So, you know, you have a fundamental difference about what happened there, but also striking was when the former president's attorneys were asked for a TikTok of what Donald Trump did in those hours after the Capitol was breached. They didn't provide one.
And certainly there's been more news coming out about a phone call with Kevin McCarthy from the House where Trump seemed pretty indifferent to what was happening at the Capitol. Rachel Hinton, also prosecutors have presented new video footage, including Republican Senator Mitt Romney being just seconds away from getting hit with protesters, and then Vice President Mike Pence and his family being rushed out. What went through your mind when you saw this?
It really put into context, I guess, that day. As I'm sure with many other people, I was following the news, I was on Twitter, I was refreshing and refreshing and refreshing. But to see these videos and to hear them and to hear and see really what went on that day, for many people firsthand, it was jarring, especially when you consider, you know, the chain of events, like Ben said, that got us here. And, you know, having a president, a former president, telling his supporters to fight like hell, you know, and then now seeing that being used to support this impeachment trial. Yeah, it was jarring. It was scary. It was, yeah, I mean, most shocking, really.
And Heather Sharon, you know, Ben Bradley alluded to some of the case the defense attorneys made today. You know, they're also showing clips of rioting that happened over the summer in Minneapolis and other cities, interspersed with comments from Democratic lawmakers about peaceful protests. Was that an effective argument?
Well, I think that if you want to equate social justice protests that we saw over the summer with a violent attempt to prevent Congress from certifying the presidential election, you can certainly make that mental leap. I don't know that the facts are on their side, but it certainly could give cover to those Republican senators wanting to acquit the president and looking for a reason to do so. And that was clearly what the president's attorneys were trying to do. They had sort of a clip reel that they showed several times where they interspersed Nancy Pelosi and everybody saying fight, you know, as if it was just a magical word that could somehow, you know, absolve the president. See, they said the exact same word. Of course, the context was completely different. But like Ben said, this is not necessarily a trial where you're really trying to convince objective jury members who are coming at this fresh. This is a political exercise, and it has to be understood as such. And I think that you have to think about it as a way of the Democrats wanting to tell the story of what happened on January 6th and leading up to it, and what sort of peril our democracy was in at that moment.
It's pretty interesting to watch, though, you know, the Republicans who, there's probably a bunch of them who are scared that they're going to end up facing what Lindsey Graham faced at the airport, where he was getting harassed by mobs. And, you know, the fact is a lot of these guys are scared of Trump and they're scared of the mob. You know, they're both scared that Trump is going to rally a primary against them. And, you know, it really says something remarkable about where our democracy is, that you have people who aren't making decisions about a guy who sent a mob at him, who said that they would be wild, who said, go on out there and fight like hell over the course of weeks. And they're like, well, I'm scared he'll figuratively send a mob at me during a primary, or perhaps even worse, like what you saw with Lindsey Graham getting chased through an airport.
Hey, Ben Bradley, is that what it's going to come down to on the GOP side? You know, senators that are thinking about re-election perhaps in 2022 versus senators that are more ensconced that don't face re-election for another 6 years?
Well, let's face it, most of the Republican senators aren't facing an immediate re-election. There's only a handful of them that are, and still, you know, they have continued to either silently or very vocally, you know, stand by, you know, an inexcusable act. And, you know, in the day or two afterwards, Lindsey Graham acknowledged, you know, the role that former President Trump played in it, but he's apparently forgotten that. You know, I think there are no profiles in courage here, and I don't mean that to judge what should happen, but I do mean it to say everyone already went in with their mind made up. The only minds that are being influenced here are those who, for the first time, are really seeing an extended look at what happened inside, who are seeing that surveillance footage. And I don't know how many people are actually watching this trial, even though it's on all of the stations every day. I see the ratings every day, and this is not, The Bachelor. This is not must-see TV.
Certainly, it might have some sway in public opinion, but if maybe there is impeachment fatigue or Trump fatigue among the general public. Heather Sharon, also this week, Biden, following a precedent with other presidents, is calling for the resignation of nearly all U.S. attorneys, including John Lausch here in the Northern District of Illinois. Got pushback from Democratic Senators Durbin and Duckworth. Do you think that might, and I should clarify that this has been confusing, but as far as we know, from the U.S. Attorney's Office, Lausch has not submitted his resignation yet. He has until the end of the month. So do you think this pushback might save his job?
Well, it could, and I think you saw Senators Durbin and Duckworth float a compromise of sorts earlier this week where they said, let him stay until a replacement is confirmed. And that's going to take who knows how long. We know that the Senate moves slowly. So their argument to the president was, hey, let him continue his work, and let's not forget he's overseeing the prosecution that involves Commonwealth Edison, as well as a number of aides to former House Speaker Michael Madigan, who has not been charged and denies wrongdoing, but also the pending trial of former Finance Committee Chairman Ed Burke, a current alderman who also has pled not guilty. So he has a really full docket. We'll have to wait and see if that sort of agreement can be brokered. But it is unusual to see a Democratic president in public, in a dispute with the second-ranking Democrat from his own party. And let's not forget that Tammy Duckworth was at least vetted to some extent for the vice presidential slot. So this, really wasn't sort of what I thought would happen in Illinois politics under the Biden administration's first month or so in office.
And let's not forget everybody in the crosshairs of John Lausch, as far as we know, indicted or not, are Democrats here in Illinois.
So is there a perception problem then?
Saying, keep him.
Is there a perception problem, Ben, then if Lausch, and Lausch came in as most of these investigations had already started. Certainly they escalated while he was there, but is there a perception problem of, switching horses in midstream when you have these high-profile cases involving Democratic lawmakers?
Well, Chicago may be one of the few cities where, reporters, are fighting to keep the U.S. attorney because there's this belief that, only this one guy can, continue to, crack the multiple cases of corruption. But I would remind you that 4 years ago, there was an uproar when, as part of the same quote-unquote tradition, Donald Trump had asked for the resignations of all these folks. Look, there are career prosecutors in these offices. These cases are very far along. As effective as Lausch has been, the cases go on, whoever's sitting in the chair.
Yeah, and you referred to Zach Fardin was the U.S. attorney when Trump fired him and brought in Lausch. Greg Pratt or Rachel Hinton, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I guess I do. Any notion who Lausch's replacement would be? Are there any names being circulated around?
Well, I heard somebody joke that Lori Lightfoot should get it.
Well, she was reportedly considered years ago.
But I'm not sure. I'm not sure who would be up for it. But it will be a challenge because obviously the cases that are in progress that have been charged will continue. But you do wonder whether or not the next guy, the next man or woman in charge of that office will care enough about public corruption to bring on some of the cases, or whether or not they have the same investment. And it's really interesting to watch, and really kind of unfortunate to see this potentially get cut short. And you do wonder how many politicians are privately, very happy about this and hoping this means that they will not get in trouble.
I think a lot of politicians that you all have interviewed at some point in the past caught up in the crosshairs here. Let's switch gears to state politics. Rachel Hinton, somehow this week, Governor Pritzker learned and taught us that the state budget deficit went down from $5.5 billion to $3 billion, and the state won't need a tax hike. How did that happen?
The economy of the state performed better than expected. So that meant that there was an influx of cash that the governor, his administration, they weren't expecting, they didn't plan for. And so that has really helped the state, has helped Governor Pritzker and others avoid really making drastic cuts or having to rely on raising the state's income tax. Although, what cuts he does decide to make remain to be seen. He's giving his state budget address next week, next Tuesday, I believe, Wednesday, actually. So, the finer details, the fine print of this remains to be seen, or might still be worked out. But for right now, it doesn't seem like we're all going to have to face an income tax increase.
And Rachel, according to Congressman Krishnamurthy, the state of Illinois, if the COVID stimulus passes, would get $7 billion for its budget. How would that be allocated?
I would assume for the budget first, given the changes here in the budget, the money that was, that comes from the cigarette tax, typically earmarked for capital projects, was moved totally toward the budget, toward dealing with this deficit. I would assume most of that money would go towards this as well, at least first, and then Governor Pritzker and others would begin trying to figure out, okay, we can allocate this much money toward education, this much to public safety, so on and so forth.
All right, and also this week, Heather, the new Speaker of the House, Chris Welch, new rules, term limits on speakers of the House and lawmakers, slight change there, and then a change in how bills get introduced to counteract, how it's worked for years here, where Madigan had almost universal control over what bill got heard and what bill died. Are these changes likely to have a big impact on how business gets done?
Well, that, I think, is the $64,000 question. You heard Republicans say, look, this is all window dressing. It doesn't matter if our bills get moved from Rules Committee. It doesn't mean they're going to get a vote. It doesn't mean they're going to get a substantive hearing. So this might not actually mean anything. But if it's just a symbolic change, then I think that is important, too, because at least Speaker Welch is signaling that it is a new era and that he will do things differently than former House Speaker Madigan. And it was not a mistake that the first thing he did to basically term limit himself as Speaker, to say, I'm not going to serve more than 10 years, after Madigan served more than 40 years in the same seat. So I think that it is the first indication that Speaker Welch is going to try to chart his own course through the legislature. But of course, the hard votes, the hard decisions are yet to come, especially now that it looks that maybe the budget will be a little bit easier to deal with. You won't have to approve a tax hike, perhaps, but the devil's really going to be in those details that Rachel was talking about. It may be difficult to put enough votes together from the Democrats, who of course have supermajorities in both houses, to vote for painful cuts to social services, which, as we know, makes up the bulk of what the state covers with its budget. So maybe a little bit more of a honeymoon, but maybe not that much more of a honeymoon.
Can I just be a little bit of a cynic here and say there are no vegetarians in a steakhouse? And, Speaker Welch was one of Madigan's guys, and he should be applauded for instituting term limits. But he came to power under Madigan's tutelage. And let's not lose sight of the fact that Madigan, while now behind the scenes, can still, in his Machiavellian way, control the Illinois Democratic Party. He hasn't given up that post, hasn't given up some of the other posts from which he draws power.
I'm sure he's putting his fingers together like that, like you just showed, Ben. Well, let's move on to some other news in the city and with COVID this week. Chicago and Cook County won't follow the state's new plan to open vaccines to people with pre-existing conditions. Federal disaster teams are coming to Illinois to help with the COVID vaccination effort. Teachers agree to an 11th-hour deal ending the high-stakes standoff over in-class learning and remembering Karen Lewis and her impact on Chicago's labor movement. Greg Pratt, the state announced that 10% of residents have been vaccinated thus far, nearly 100,000 today. Starting February 26, all folks over 16 years old with pre-existing conditions are eligible. Will there be enough vaccine to meet that demand?
Short answer, no. Long answer, you know, they're working on it. And in fairness, we beat them up sometimes because we beat up the state and the city because we want more, we want faster, we want to get back to normal. It's actually pretty remarkable what we've been able to accomplish. That said, this thing is a mess in a lot of ways. This whole refreshing the browser to find appointments, everybody doing the Hunger Games is pretty bad, but you know, there are a lot of problems. There are clinics canceling appointments because they say they didn't get shipments that they expected. That's an issue, and that there's some real problems. So, you know, but will the governor be able to fulfill the demand? Of course not. You know, will they be able to accommodate some of it? Of course, and that'll continue. And hopefully, as more vaccine gets approved and comes on the market, it'll get better.
Well, clearly here in Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot's admitting that they won't be able to fulfill all the demand for the next phase just because not enough vaccine is coming, and they've promised a certain amount of vaccines for teachers as part of their agreement. Rachel Hinton, what about in African American and Hispanic Latino communities? It seems that since the beginning of the vaccine rollout, they have lagged behind and are still lagging behind.
Yeah, I would say that that's still accurate. You know, now I believe the state and the city, as well as the county, they are rolling out efforts to really push people in the Black and brown communities in the city and in the county and the state to get the vaccine. You know, they're doing vaccine awareness. There are social media campaigns to try to reach out to people to really, you know, help them understand the vaccine, why it's important and why they should get it. But just as, you know, there's a huge lag in terms of, or rather a real discrepancy between supply and demand, there's also, you know, a real discrepancy between the communities that maybe should be getting it versus who is getting it. Black and brown communities have been hit amazingly hard by this pandemic, and yet they are the ones who aren't receiving the vaccine, maybe some by choice, maybe some not by choice, but I think that, you know, that's a real issue that we will continue to watch.
And at the same time, for a Valentine's Day weekend here, Mayor Lightfoot has announced a little bit of loosening of the restrictions of indoor dining, although not all the way to 50%, even though Chicago, by state standards, is eligible for that. Ben Bradley, why keep an extra round of restrictions on Chicago restaurants?
Look, I think everybody from the mayor to the governor, you know, is concerned that with these new variants, that despite really positive numbers for several months now, that we could see another spike. Let's not lose sight of the fact that, you know, our daily number of new COVID cases, our number of hospitalizations, you know, they're at the lowest number in 4 months. Think back to mid-October. That's when our numbers last looked this good. But the concern is, can we get enough vaccine out before these variants kick in? And I know people are tired of hearing that. I know people are tired of hearing that, well, what about the Thanksgiving surge and the Christmas surge? Well, you know what? Other places did see a surge. We didn't. Pat yourselves on the back, Illinois residents, for apparently doing the right thing. But, you know, this is the ultimate race against time, isn't it? And while some people would like to point out that, you know, maybe we should be in phase 5 with everything open again because we do have treatments, we have hospital space, there's a vaccine going out there. You know, I think elected officials are really hesitant and concerned to just say, all righty, Illinois, let's party like it's, what, 1990? No, that'd be 2019.
Let's party like it's 2020 before the virus hit.
Yeah.
Also, it's 20 below zero, and that might help keeping people indoors, even if the state does go to phase 5. Heather Sharon, let's move to education. What clinched the deal very early this week between CTU and CPS?
Well, vaccinations was one of the last sticking points. The city agreed to accelerate the pace of vaccination. They also changed the rules that would not require teachers to either face losing their jobs or going back to school before being vaccinated. And that was a crucial part for the union too. The city also agreed to the union's request to set a metric citywide to close schools again. Before that, the city just wanted to close individual schools based on individual cases at each school. And there will be some. That is unavoidable. The question is what will be used to close schools if they see sort of an outbreak? So those two were very important issues. I think there was also a sense from the union side that they had just gotten everything they could from the city short of a strike, which could have been ruled illegal and which would have opened up a whole host of other problems. So this was, I think, the union agreed that this was the best they could do, but it was not a deal that they were overjoyed by or, were thrilled about. And it's really less of sort of the end of this discussion as opposed to just the start of the next discussion, which will focus on reopening high schools to some sort of hybrid program. Those high schools have now been closed for almost a year, and that's what's going to come next.
What about that, Greg Pratt? Do you think high school students will be back because they aren't part of this reopening plan? Will they be back this year?
That's a great question. I've got a story in Sunday's paper where I talked to the mayor, CTU president, and the vice president. And I talked to all three of them, and at times I felt we're going to be able to reach a deal without all the drama. And at times I felt there is no way in hell these people will be able to reach a deal without a bunch of conflict. So you should read it to see their comments. But it's hard to say because there are a lot of strong feelings and strong personalities here. And there's some really complicated issues. You would hope that everyone would have gone through what we just went through, which was a brutal experience for everybody, and be able to avoid it and communicate better and more openly and honestly with each other without all of the drama. But this is Chicago, so
that's too much to ask for with these two parties. Ben Bradley, we only have a few seconds left. Karen Lewis's legacy. I mean, you've been covering politics in Chicago for a long time. What's her legacy?
I think she was such a fierce, vocal, powerful advocate, not only for the Chicago Teachers Union, but in many regards for the public school system. You can quarrel with issues that you may not agree with her on, but boy, could she give an interview. Boy, could she make her case. And I think that's what journalists will miss so much. I mean, here is a woman who stood toe-to-toe with Rahm Emanuel in the 5th floor of City Hall, with him in, full expletive flying mode. And she said, nope, not going to be bullied.
And I got to say, there were probably a few expletives thrown in there, too. Certainly, as a reporter, it was always a fascinating story when it involved Karen Lewis and Rahm Emanuel and the two of them together. We're out of time right now, so our thanks to Heather Sharon, Rachel Hinton, Ben Bradley, and Greg Pratt. And that is our show for this Friday night. Be sure to join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. And then we're back at 7 o'clock next week. And now for the Weekend Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy, safe, and warm, and have a great weekend.
Closed